All right, and welcome back to another edition of the Pearl Snap Tactical Podcast. It's the show that gives you the tips and tools you need to make yourself faster, stronger, and harder to kill. Mark, and today I have a special guest, author and Special Forces veteran and all-around badass dude, Clay Martin. Clay, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Man, I'm super excited to have you here. Clay, I've got a lot of questions I want to get into. I know you've written several books. I've read many of them. And your new one is Barbarian Spirit, correct? Is that your latest one?
That is correct. That's the latest one. It came out in July.
Yeah. So for those, I've read it. It's a great read. Highly recommend. But for those of you, those in the audience that don't know you yet, can you kind of give us your background and bio?
Sure. And I'll make it quick too, just so I don't waste our time asking questions and stuff. But I did a lot of nonsense for the military. I started as a Marine Corps. I was a grunt, and then I was in Recon Battalion. I was a scout sniper for them. GT score went up, so I changed services around 2003. Went to the SF pipeline via the National Guard as a 19th Group for a while. I went to a SIF company, so I was in the Commanders and Extremist Force there. I was an assaulter and a sniper for them. Then I taught at our CQB school called Special Forces Advanced Urban Combat. I also taught our level 1 SOTIC, which is our sniper course. While I was there, I got bored, so I started competitively shooting, became a master class USPSA shooter and a Pro 3 gunner. Medically retired around 2013, 2014. Started writing, actually mostly doing like gun journalism, writing crap, but I got tired of that stuff because the journalism side of that does get old. It gets really old. Around like 2017 or so, I was like, you know what, I bet I can write a book. And next thing you know, I just kind of fell into that, and that's what I've done. The two that I'm most well known for is Concrete Jungle and Prairie Fire. Those are my survival books, and they're not like how to boil water and stick a thermometer up your ass kind of books. They're more about what I see is like the big stuff.
Those are good skills, though.
Those
man.
are good
Those
skills.
Are important.
They're great. But I mean, some people don't realize though is like there are better people than like a soft guy to teach you that, because we get like 3 weeks of making fires or some stuff in the woods. For the most part, we're better at like organizing and fighting. I would go to like the dude that I normally recommend for like the real survival stuff is Cody London, the hippie guy from Dual Survival.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, no, he's great, and he's lived his whole life like this. This is his stuff.
Yeah.
He knows his jam. And, my stuff is much more on not quite the tactical side, but kind of like how to organize your people and how to have a neighborhood watch and that kind of thing.
Well, I think that those are some stiff credentials, so definitely qualifying you to talk about what we're going to talk about today. So what kind of generated this? My idea to reach out to you was I came across an article on your blog, and so I kind of pulled some questions from there. But in your books, and especially on some of the articles you've written and posted online, you emphasize that like there's a lot of great fighters that we've had throughout history that were amateurs, right? They weren't professional soldiers, and they were trained for necessity rather than because it was their job. So in today's world, on our podcast, we talk about like a warrior mindset. We're trying to revalorize some of these martial virtues. And probably, I think everybody in this audience resonates it, but, especially when I talk about like that aspect and pairing that spiritual component with learning tactics and things like that, sometimes people kind of see a disconnect and they're like, well, I work at a bank. Why do I need to have this stuff? And everything like that. And I'm like, no, this is really how men operated through most of history. We're just in a weird timeline right now. And I think quickly we are going to revert back to how things were more closer aligned in the past than they are now. But anyway, how for someone who's interested in kind of reclaiming that warrior spirit for the modern day, like how do they do that in the modern era?
Well, first thing you have to look at, I feel like, is just take a quick like historical look at professional soldiers versus amateurs. All right, and it's an arms race. It's gone back and forth. There were times when like the Roman legion could kick anyone's ass, for instance. All right, but then they ran up against some dudes they couldn't. Spartans, same thing. They were eventually crushed by the sacred band of Thebes, who was kind of like cobbled together. We're at this point, and this is part of the problem with Americans. We can only see in about 20-year spectrums. So we see SOCOM. Oh my God! Oh, they're so cool. Those guys are, and SOCOM is kind of the professional warrior cast for America, and we have been since probably honestly since like the late 70s. So people think that's the only thing that matters. No, dude, that's not. It's not even close to right. That's not how it matters. And so I think that what we need to, as a people, generally speaking, we need to look at ourselves as the martial skills that were inherent on a frontiersman around 1880.
Mm.
Because just some dude living in like Texas or Oklahoma or whatever that just he had to know all this stuff to be able to live. All right, he had to know survival. He had to know how to eat. He had to know how to fight because he had to fight Indians all the time. And by and large, also that dude would have kicked the shit out of a U.S. Army infantryman of the day.
Mm. Mm.
I mean, you really had to think about it. Like they were just recruiting dudes from the East Coast that guy might have grown up in a tobacco plantation or he's never seen a plane, he's never seen a horse. All right, he's still on foot trying to chase Comanches, like stuff that just doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
And even the elite of like the U.S. Army at that time, like the cavalry, yeah, they were great at like doing cavalry charges if you're dumb enough to stand there and take it. But for the most part, they had to rely on these other guys. These guys just lived on the frontier to be their scouts and actually, pin them down. And so that's kind of what we need to get back to, I feel. It's more like a lifestyle thing, and we can do that. We have done that on this continent many times, and we've done this as a people hundreds of times.
Yeah. So we've had a conversation offline and just in your articles and your books, you talk about, and it's the zeitgeist, right? Everyone's talking about the crumbling of society, right? The decline of the West, and a lot of the things that we traditionally relied on for protection, right? I.e. the government and security systems are they're not as well, just to put it nicely, they're not as reliable, right, as they were. So it really is, I think people are starting to come to the conclusion that we're going to have to start rebuilding our own communities.
Yes.
I mean, you could see just the way that natural disasters were handled recently,
Oh, good Lord.
that the need for community, I'm not even talking about like, Mad Max scenarios, just stuff like natural disasters, right? So when people want to begin to prepare, right, as the responsibility is shifting from relying on other people to relying on their self, like how do people prepare for that shift mentally, and from
Okay,
a practical standpoint?
this is huge. All right, this is huge. This is a huge piece of it. This is the why, actually.
Yeah.
So when you look at, it's not like blue helmets are going to invade or any of the other cool stuff, because that would be awesome because that would unify everyone. That would be an instant, like, okay, those are the bad guys. The much more likely glide path is just what we're seeing, like a slow collapse of state power and state ability. And, I don't know, next thing you know, there'd be like cartels at will running over the border, slinging fentanyl. That'd be crazy, right? It's fucking unimaginable. That's the disconnect. People tend to see one or the other. What is happening in places like the border counties in Texas is the state no longer has money or no longer. So cartels are like the de facto enforcement mechanism there. And you can either get down or lay down. That will start to happen, I believe, more and more across the country. We're already seeing it. California, you can shoplift up to $1,000 or $950 a go, and it's not even a crime.
Yeah.
It's fucking crazy, right? But
crazy. Yeah.
I mean, it's actually so crazy that, when that first, I was like, should I just go to California and steal 3 PlayStations 5 times a day? Look, really, it's a business opportunity.
I know. Yeah. Crazy. Sell it on eBay and
half the cut. Yeah. It's profitable. So people need to think more in these terms. Like, it sounds insane, but it's happening. And the same thing, the war on police, this is especially true for, I feel so bad for cops in the modern era, dude, because they have gotten screwed so hard. I mean, it's awful. Most of the guys that were good have either quit or they've gone to like a small department where they're never going to have to deal with this, stuff again. And because of that, we've seen an incredible weakening of the law enforcement community, and that's going to get worse. No 18-year-old, strapping young man that's the quarterback for, the Division 4, whatever. He doesn't want to be a cop anymore because he saw what happened to those guys. I don't blame him a bit. I don't. Yeah. Whereas even 20 years ago, that was a very good glide path. You had a lot of like athletic, strong. That was their next step. Okay, makes sense. Cool, awesome, man. It's still a physical job. That's not happening anymore. So you see it every day. You see the empire collapsing, or the rule of law collapsing. Well, when that happens, you have two choices. You can just live at the whim of the criminals, or you can accept responsibility for your own safety. Uh,
Mm,
there's just no other two ways about it.
yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and I'd say like the military's getting that way too. I mean,
Oh yeah.
well, we know that some of the branches are having trouble meeting their recruiting goals. The
Hmm.
people that they have in can't even pass the PT test. Dudes, even once they're in, can't pass the PT test. I mean,
Hmm.
it's a real issue, right?
It is.
So you talked about, yeah, I think came straight out of your article, but you're talking about like how war, like the different ways war may come to the civilian, right?
Yes.
Instead of going overseas or thinking you're going to get drafted, that war can come home to you. Like,
You
and
can.
so you mentioned things like cartels and gang violence. Like,
Oh yeah.
how do you see that playing out in the next 10, 15 years? What does that look like, do you think?
But it goes more to that like slow collapse mentality.
Mm-hmm.
It's not like the cartel is gonna take over Austin, Texas, and run up the cartel flag and be like, we own Texas. That's not how shit works.
Yeah.
It's more of just a central power structure kind of turning a blind eye because they don't have the
Mm-hmm.
resources anymore. They don't have the will. The will is the most important
Yeah.
thing,
Yeah.
and it just slowly kind of creeps up. The way that these things go, and next thing you know, that's the power structure. With what's going on
Yeah.
today, 'cause it's election day right now. I mean, we could see not just like fireworks, but we could see months of legal nonsense, and they got to send
Mm-hmm.
all the federal marshals to I don't know, round up people that had Trump, well, some kind of bullshit. Basically, things that draw resources away. All right, and anytime
Yeah.
you have that power vacuum, something is always going to fill it. So I mean, it's
Mm-hmm.
just a much more realistic look.
Yeah. Yeah, it's I think people, I mean, obviously any scenario can be on the table. I mean, I think all bets are off. Like back a few years ago when there was a certain respiratory virus going on and the first thing everybody did was go out and buy toilet paper. I think like anything's possible now, you know what I mean? Like,
Right,
but
right.
I mean, you could tell me the craziest scenario and it's like, yeah, man, I believe it. That could be possible. But yeah, I agree with you because like, well, you mentioned cartels or the gangs, for instance, like they may take over an area to operate it, but they don't want
Yeah,
to assume the rules of governing over you. Like they don't
right,
want to have to provide trash service,
right.
water,
No,
and utilities. They're not in that
right.
business, but they do want to hollow out the power structure, right?
Yes,
And you see that especially like over the Middle East. I know you have where, you may have a government in place, a de facto government to handle that kind of stuff. But the people that are the shot callers are that criminal or terrorist element.
exactly.
So
Yep.
that they want that. They want to hollow it out so that they can operate their business instead of being in the business of managing people. You know what I mean?
Right.
So yeah. Um, so what are some crucial changes that people need to start if they haven't already need to start like taking inventory and starting to orient themselves towards something like this?
Well, I think we've actually had a lot of help here between like the COVID nonsense and then the summer of love right after that.
Mm,
People have started to see this one, and dude, even for me, even being like the training business guy, like 5 or 6, especially like 6 years ago, if people wanted like tactics, like small unit tactics, you'd be
hmm.
like, all right, man, I'll teach you, but I mean, come on, dude, let's be real. Like, you're never going to, like, if I was going to teach somebody like what they actually needed to know, it's like how to shoot a pistol at like 3 feet because it's going to be
Yeah.
street crime. And that's
Yeah.
it. How to get the
Yeah.
gun out, how to live long
Hmm.
enough to get the gun. That's it. That's all you need.
Yeah. Yeah.
All of a sudden, we've got potentially hundreds of thousands of people doing crazy shit. Thousands of people, in fact, sometimes invading like small towns in both the
Hmm.
Pacific Northwest and the Northeast. All of a sudden, like, infantry 101 sounds like that might be some stuff that we need. Like, I'm like, oh man,
Yeah.
no, really. Yeah,
Hmm.
it's like, oh man, long guns, like the whole thing,
Hmm.
because you don't know what kind of threat you're going to face.
Yeah.
The most important thing is actually also too. It's nothing to do with armament or tactics or anything like that. It's organizing, man. It's
Mm,
having a gang of your own, and it doesn't
hmm.
mean that you need to get in a crime or any dumb shit like that. Just you got to have like 10 to 20 guys that are like your
Hmm.
homies that like you've actually trained with. It doesn't have
Hmm.
to be elaborate high speed training, but you've like been to the woods with one time.
Mm-hmm.
You've shot some guns with, so you know that they're competent and they're not a boob and they're
Mm-hmm.
not going to shoot their own toes off.
Yeah.
And again, things that sound like completely insane just a short time ago, but you had to have that. The organization and the structure matters so much more than anything else.
Yeah.
I tell people all the time, especially guys that are coming to this from no like military background, especially
Mm-hmm.
this is so unfortunate, but it's so true. And I was this way too, so it's a real thing. I was raised on like action movies in the '80s, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like Chuck Norris and
Yep.
it's always like
yeah.
the guy, like the one dude is like, okay, well, I'm gonna have to kick everybody's ass because I'm so cool. The real world doesn't work like that. Not at all. Not for anybody. Nothing. Not even fucking close. In fact, like doctrinally, I am both John Rambo and Bob Lee Swagger. I got both their backgrounds. Bam, right here in the trophy. I can't do this shit by myself. All right. Yeah. I will, and we talk about this as like, Green Beret and shit. Like, I would get my ass kicked by a good squad from the 82nd Airborne. All right, unless you put me in some kind of crazy fucking scenario where I've got like a 1,000-yard gun and they don't, and I still don't like my fucking odds. I don't like them at all. Yeah. In order to fight larger groups of people, potentially, you've got to have somebody, you got to have some help.
Mm-hmm.
Even one more dude, your ability to do things is exponentially greater. Just you and one other guy that can like fire maneuver, some shit like that. You can at least do something now. If you're one guy, you can stand there and shoot your guns empty. That's it. That's your tactic.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. Yeah. So what? So you would say, like, okay, first place to start is you need to get out of the vision of you being the lone wolf kind of guy that's got like 10 cases of tuna fish and 10,000 rounds in your basement, and that you're going to ride this out. That it's really you're going to have people that you can count on, and finding those people. So that's one thing. For some reason, that topic has been coming up a lot lately. I just finished and uploaded a interview I did with NC Scout, who I think you know.
Nice. Oh, yeah,
and
my buddies,
and we were kind of talking about just building a network, and like, what's your take on that? Like, because I do get questions like, I'm in Washington State, or I'm in some kind of state where like, people are not into this stuff. And like, where do I find people if I didn't grow up with them and know them? How do I find people I can trust that are like-minded?
This is important. This is the important thing. This is also why people don't like to do this, and it's much more fun to just go to the range and put on armor and run around like a fucking weirdo. This is so much fucking harder. It is so much more difficult to find the guys. But the first thing is you have to start. Like 3 years ago would have been good, or start today. Whatever. You can find them a lot of times. You're just gonna have to. You just have to look. You have to look hard. And you have to feel people out in kind of like almost like a salesman-y kind of way to see who's down and who's not. But the best places to start. Sometimes there'll be like a group of dudes in your local competitive shooting thing, be it USPSA, IDPA, PRS, whatever bullshit. There'll be a bunch of dudes that are there to play the sport, and that's cool. But there'll be another group of dudes, and you'll spot them. All right, they're kind of like this guy. They're there to better themselves for something else. Those are good ones to get. Second one, believe it or not, I out of like jujitsu gyms, things like that. All right, if you're young enough to still want to do karate fighting and shit, one, is a good skill to have, and number two, you're at least going to find like fit dudes there. And once again, you're not going to like recruit like the 5 guys that are there because they want to compete at nationals. Don't even fucking talk to them. Like they're doing something totally different. But there's going to be some other guys at the bottom of the pyramid that are there because they're scared. All right, they want to learn how to fight. All right, and they see all the elements of it. And as you like become friends with those guys, all right, people will open up more, and you'll find that those guys are great too. And if nothing else, both these things, they're giving you people that have the will to get their ass up off the couch and do something. All right, that's a huge, good starting point in the modern world. And it's funny, I talk all that about jiu-jitsu though, but I actually taught the last time I went to a jiu-jitsu gym. I actually ended up teaching the 4th degree black belt that owns the place pistol. All right, because he was down. All right, he was totally fucking down, and that also bonded us in a way that it wasn't going to bond me with anybody else.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
sometimes actually you will. The higher level guys too are like, this is all cool and shit, but I need a gun and some friends.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
the only other way that I've really had success, and this one takes a little bit longer to like put together. Again, you've got to have people that are self starters and that have that idea of betterment already in them. And you can do it just by starting something simple, like throw up a local Facebook group that's about fucking hiking or first aid or
Mm-hmm.
some bullshit like that. The first aid was actually great because it's so innocuous.
Mm-hmm.
Then you hold a little meeting and you can do the first one yourself and just I don't know. You don't have to know what the hell you're doing. Just talk about, hey, I bought this stuff and I was thinking about a group buy or whatever. The guys that are like really into this will gravitate together and
Yeah.
you'll figure out who's who very quickly.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah. I think that seems to be the theme, like kind of running through what you just said, and I don't want to like rehash what NC Scout talked about because people could just go listen to that episode. But you, it's like you have to bring a certain amount of sincerity to it. Like you actually have to want, instead of moving from desperation, like, oh my gosh, I'm behind the eight ball, I got to find these dudes, and looking at people like commodities. It's like
Mm-hmm.
you have to actually be going out there to try to form real relationships, like
Yes.
for the sake of, now the benefit is you're going to get like-minded people that will watch out
Yes.
for you and come to your aid and vice versa when you need it. But you really, I think, have to start out with, I'm looking for people, genuine friendships, right? The
Yes.
actual people that I want to
Yes.
spend time with and invest in, and likewise. Would you agree with that?
I know. I absolutely agree with that. No, that's a
Yeah.
huge point. And anybody, you should listen to NC Scott's episode because that dude is really smart, man. He's really got his shit
Yeah.
together too. Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, no, he's a great dude. The only other way that you can really kind of do this is to take your existing friend group and try to form
Mm-hmm.
them into this other thing. But I've found that to be much more difficult.
Hmm.
Uh, you know, depending on like who you are. Like a lot of times, like people will play along for a weekend or two, but then they're like, "Man, I want to watch football this Sunday." Like, nah, dog,
Yeah.
we're not doing that.
Yeah.
And that's fine.
Yeah.
The other thing about this is if you're really serious and you start walking these other roads, you may find yourself leaving your old friend group behind. And
Mm.
that's not that they're bad people or anything like that. And it's not that that's something you want. It's just something you will naturally do. It's just like getting into a
Yeah.
new hobby. Like you're going to tend to be friends with the guys that are into that new hobby.
Yeah.
That's okay too. It's
Yeah.
fine if that's how it works out.
I've definitely experienced that, a little bit for sure, because there's only so many hours in the day. You have
Right.
responsibilities with your
Yeah.
job and your family. And so you only
Hmm.
have a finite amount of time. And so if you're plugging away into this venture, it's kind of like, hey, if you want to hang out, you kind of have to be in this boat too. And if not, I'm sorry, because this is where I'm feeling drawn that I need to go, and you're more than welcome to come. But yeah, I've
Yeah.
definitely experienced that. It's like you said, like you would think going to your friends would be the most logical place, and you might pull one or two, but really the truth is, if they were into that, they probably would already be doing it, or they would already be having conversations with you about that,
Yeah.
so if they're not,
Exactly.
like if you're a group and in the past all you guys did was golf, and that's all they want to do is golf, if those are still the conversations you're having, then they're probably not going to want to get in the boat with you and row
Right.
that direction, right?
Right.
So I want to get into a little, if you're comfortable, get
Sure.
into something a little bit more esoteric, which I know you're no stranger to that either. But one thing I've talked about a lot, and not every episode, but I bring it up. It's a perennial topic. It's just I'm very interested in the fact that warrior cultures, like, and I'm talking, like Middle Ages and then beyond there, like, so
Yeah.
getting into antiquity, you'd be hard pressed to find one that did not have a spiritual aspect to the lifestyle.
Yes.
You know what I mean? Like it was
Yes.
very much ingrained, and I don't think it's just because they were superstitious or stuff, because you
Right.
have you have atheists even into the pre-Socratics, or
Mhm.
I mean, atheism is not new. It's that it didn't come along with Darwin. So there's been plenty of other people that were not into that. But what does, first of all, do you have a spiritual component or do you think that's a necessary part of a warrior path? And then what does that look like for you?
Okay, so I don't think it's absolutely. In fact, I know it's not absolutely necessary, and I know that because I was actually an atheist for all the time that I was actually fighting in a war.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, so I know that to be true. And you can also say, when you look back at history, that there have been always been atheists. There have also been dudes that professed whatever shit that they had to say at the time, so that they could still be into war.
Yep.
Because a lot of those times, like, okay, well, there's areas like if you're not Christian, well, you're going to get killed. If you're not
Yeah.
whatever the fucking Roman
Mm-hmm.
guys pre-Christian, so you can tell
Yeah.
that a lot of guys, or at least a number of guys across time, have also faked it.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I do
Yeah.
think it will help you. I do think it will make you more powerful. This is something that I knew even fighting the war as an atheist myself, because the guys that I was fighting largely were very religious. And that would be, obviously Muslim terrorists.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the funny thing about that, some of their guys at the top of the chain on that side, they didn't believe it either. You could tell because when you
Mm-hmm.
raided their fucking house, there was like, porno mags and fucking empty cans of gin under the bed and like all kinds of crazy shit.
Yeah.
Uh, so it cuts both ways. But I will
Mm-hmm.
definitely say, for fighting like the guy on the street or fighting a guy that was a real religious extremist, there's
Mm-hmm.
something to, like, it made that guy a little bit tougher, and a little bit more fearless, and
Mm-hmm.
that's just fucking facts. Um,
Yeah.
so for myself, it's funny. I've actually come to a spiritual awakening like way late in my life. Just honestly about 3 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
With 2024, I think it's a little more than that. I started, seeing, or I started believing, I would say, probably like mid Trump last time. And it was because I saw the evil side first. And by that, I mean
Mm-hmm.
like the kid fucking, like all the crazy shit
Mm-hmm.
that like I had somehow ignored before, but now it was like in the forefront and you had to notice it.
Yeah.
So that's actually led me to like a huge kind of religious awakening myself. In fact, that's most of what Barbarian Spirit is about. And it's
Mm-hmm.
my take on things. But it's funny because I get so many calls now, and it's not even, it's about Barbarian Spirit, but it's about the one I wrote before that too. It was Wrath of the
Mm-hmm.
Wendigo. In a lot of ways, was visions. All right, it was.
Mm-hmm.
It didn't even feel like I wrote the book. It felt like it flowed out of my hands, and the story was all formed up here. I wrote the whole thing in like 30 days, which is insane.
Wow.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah.
Something else was speaking, but after Wendigo came out, I got more phone calls and emails from. I mean, I'm talking at this point hundreds of people that were experiencing this same kind of, spiritual is the right word, because they didn't know exactly what it was. It was a
Yeah.
spiritual awakening around like 1920 or
Mm-hmm.
2019, 2020,
Mm-hmm.
2021.
Mm-hmm.
So I do believe that we're headed for something is happening. Something weird is
Mm-hmm.
happening. And I don't know exactly what that is, but it's what's going on. And
Yeah. Huh.
to dig one more step deeper into your specific question there, too, it's also amazing how many mystical traditions started out as warriors first. This is
Mm-hmm.
actually something that just became clear to me like a month ago, but
Yeah.
fuck it, it's what happened. Almost every mystic society started out as warriors first, and then
Mm-hmm.
even some of your greatest philosophers, Socrates, Plato,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Zen Buddhism, which was actually exclusive to the samurai, was
Mm-hmm.
brought to them by a blue-eyed barbarian from India who brought it to China on his way to Japan.
Huh.
Templars, uh,
Yeah.
just almost all of them. Julius Evola, he was
Yeah.
a artillery officer in the Alpine Front in World War One.
Mm-hmm.
All these are the majority, I would, at least that I've seen, of the great philosophers were soldiers too, which is
Mm-hmm.
absolutely crazy. But
Yeah.
it does tell me that there's something to tying the two together, and it's not just fear. It's not just seeing death. So you got to find a way to justify it or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
It's something else for certain.
Yeah, that's something I'm still trying to peer into. I don't know. I can't put my finger on, and maybe it's even different for every individual. But when you look at societies, there, I definitely see that component, and I don't know if maybe it's, well, I think one of the benefits is it keeps your soul, it keeps you whole. You're dealing with death of your friends, maybe eradication of your village. You're coming against some really heavy stuff, and I don't know, maybe that's one aspect of it, that it keeps you whole. And maybe I don't know, it gives you, there's something to be said, and maybe this is just kind of getting Jungian on it, but there's something there about like that collective unconscious, especially on the tribal level, that is there to be tapped into. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
That is, that can only be accessed if you're, if that's a part of your life. Like you said, you could be an atheist and you could still run a gun, maybe better than anybody, but you know what? How are you going to deal with the aftermath of that? And then what about that, the time when you need something that's beyond human, you know what I mean, that you
Yeah.
need
Oh yeah.
that, you know. And I mean, if there's a materialist listening to it, they could say, oh, that's bull. But I mean, and maybe it is, but there is, you can't discount that phenomenon, you know. I mean, that
Right.
phenomenon, we definitely have data on that, we have history on that. So I don't know, that's very, it's, I don't know, there's something there that I'm kind of on my path pursuing. And I found a benefit to me as I've leaned into it too. But yeah, but I can't say I've got it all figured out though.
Yeah, me
But
neither. Not even close.
yeah.
Not even close.
Yeah.
I will. I will definitely say this, and I believe that this is good enough for if you're kind of like forming a little warrior society, which is what kind of
Hmm.
I'm asking people to do. All right, even if you don't believe, you're the non-believer guy. All right, it's okay. It's okay to be that guy, but
Hmm.
the just the concepts of like ritual and things like that. It's not that they like actually do something; is that they matter. They matter in
Hmm.
the conscious mind. And this is the same thing you see in like the army. Like there's ceremony for certain bullshit, like promotions or
Hmm.
whatever.
Yeah.
All of that, even if it's a nonsense ritual, all right, it's still a binding thing. All right, it still
Hmm.
helps group cohesion, which is why they do
Yep.
it. Which is why
Yep.
they spent like 500 years figuring this out on like a military front.
Yeah.
So if you're, I believe that your little warrior group should have, even if you want to keep it non religious, that's fine too. It should have some ritual to it. It will
Hmm.
help. That is
Yeah.
something that does matter. I fuck Napoleon. You know, in some ways the greatest of all time. What did he say? Moral is to the physical is 3 to 1. That was his belief.
Mm. Mm.
As well as he also said, what was it? Something to the effect of like, I can make men do crazy things they wouldn't do otherwise and die for a small scrap of ribbon.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
fine too, man. Hey, look,
Hmm.
I get it. You know,
Yeah.
it does
Yeah.
matter.
Yeah. It does. I mean, because in a way, like rituals, even on a very simple way, like you said, it does create a culture, right? And
Yes,
that,
exactly.
that is what I just read this book, and I've talked to the author, and we haven't linked it up yet, but hopefully he's going to come on the show too. But he's a Christian guy, and he wrote a book called "Live Not by Lies," and it's really an account of saying, hey, as we go into a dystopian totalitarian society, you know, even be it a soft totalitarian society, which is definitely
Mhm.
what we're drifting to, you know, he went back and started researching societies that survived the Iron Curtain years, you know,
Oh
during the
wow.
communist era. Yeah, it's a really
Oh
good book, dude.
wow.
And one thing and the reason why I really wanted to have this guy on is because he was honest, because he's not just like, hey, I'm a Christian, therefore the only reason why these groups made it is because he was a Christian. Because he's honest. He said there were some groups that were not Christian, that were
Right.
atheists, that survived, you know, the
Interesting.
Iron Curtain. And this is how they did it. And, you know, one of the ways that they did it was by building parallel societies and
Oh wow.
building parallel cultures and even economies that survived underground. And one thing that was really telling, that he said that one thing is that the people, when they would get together, is that the older people would tell stories about what it was like before the communist, you know,
Oh
like
wow.
it's almost like, man, and then if you want to get into like, it's almost like they're replicating the same types of things that like the pre-Christian societies, you know, with paganism, like with the ancestor veneration, like keeping the
Yeah.
ancestor memory alive of your
Yeah.
culture, of your tribe. But like they're constantly stoking that fire so that people didn't forget who they were, where they came from, right? And I think ritual, ceremony, traditions, you know,
Uh-huh.
we live in a secular modernist society that wants to eschew all that, right?
Yeah.
they shit on all that, and they say, oh, that's backwards, it's stupid, it doesn't really mean anything. They're very what I want to say, they're kind of cynical about it. But when you peel back and look at people who've really survived hard times, those are the things that kept that's the glue, right, that keeps it
Yeah.
together. And whether you want to call that a spiritual or not, the nomenclature doesn't really matter. It's the acts that
Yeah.
matter. The actions are what matter. And so yeah, it's very powerful. And I think it's very valuable. That's something I think we need to really get into. I've also, on more times than probably people want to count, on this show, is like, I've gone back and I'm in the process of rereading like the old classic, like the Iliad, reading Beowulf,
Yeah.
reading these, like
Hmm.
these things. I was like, man, people like things that people just, it's not really encouraged unless you're an academic that focuses on that. Most people haven't read that stuff. And I'm like, man,
Right.
that is the treasure trove. Because versus, and look, man, I'll watch John Wick and I'll watch, I'll watch all these stories, but right now we're fascinated with like the anti-hero, right? The guy that's
Yep.
broken, the guy that's not really a good guy, but he's better than the bad stuff that's oppressing, you know what I mean? And he's always got this problem. And but really, when you go back, because in today's modern age, they're like, that guy's real, that guy's more relatable. But no, really, we need to get back to those ancient sources, because they lay out the template for building the nobility of the soul and the
Yeah.
spirit, right? And
Yeah.
transcending it, and we don't have that anymore. It's the modern media is not going to give it to you. They
Right.
might rip off the story, but then they're going to profane
Right.
it. You know what I mean? They're going to
Right.
profane
Exactly.
it, and at the very end, that it's not going to be as useful to you than if you would go back. And yeah, I know some of those sagas and stuff are kind of hard to read, but it's just like, it's like watching a movie with subtitles, right? A foreign movie with subtitles. It's like, it's distracting at first, but once you get acclimated to it, you can
Right.
read it, and they're very captivating, man. I've really benefited going back and reading those. I can't get enough of it, man. And I found, just on a personal level, it's changing me. It's
Yeah.
given me and but I think there's definitely, and I'm not saying that it's somebody up in a ivory tower, pushing buttons saying, no, don't let them read this or anything. But I think it's the zeitgeist of our time that is getting away from that stuff. It doesn't want that. It doesn't want you having it. And I think anytime someone's telling me they don't want me to have it, that's exactly what I
Exactly
need
right.
to be reading. That's what I
Exactly
need to be
right.
spending my time thinking through. But yeah, let's see. Before we move on, do you got anything else on that?
No, I think it's hugely important. It's actually something I'm trying to do myself. But the other
Yeah.
thing about it, look at the attention span, all the things that have been done to us to make us have like a 3 to 5 minute attention span or
Mm,
less now if you're a TikTok guy.
yeah.
And I have no immunity to this. I found myself go from like no social media to be a Twitter dude, but I'll only read
Yeah.
if it's 180 characters or whatever bullshit. I
Yeah.
won't read somebody's like, well, after a while of doing that, now I find it difficult to pick up something longer read. I'm like,
Hmm.
oh, this is a
Yeah.
problem.
Yeah.
If if nothing else, too, is if you go back and do something, it's going to retrain you to be able to have a longer train of thought, which is
Yep.
important, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. And right. Yeah. Cause focusing is a skill too, and that can
It is.
atrophy. And yeah. And that's something, cause I'm the same way, man. I do have a Kindle. I will read stuff on the computer screen, but I don't like it. My preference is always paper. It's
Me
always
too.
a book. And 9 times out of 10, most books I read now more than I probably ever have in my life. And it, 9 out of 10 times it will be the physical book. Because then the other thing with
Yeah.
digital, that can be gone, that can be taken away, that can
Right.
be eliminated,
Yeah.
that could be digitally burned. But the books, as long as I have
Right.
them in my possession, they ain't going nowhere. But um, are there any books other than your own that you are really into, that have had a profound, impact on the way you think? It could be anything.
Yes. I'm going to recommend one that you got to find a very specific translation. I think it's the Tuttle translation. All right, so I was actually very big into like Eastern philosophy more than Western philosophy, which I'm kind of changing now. But I carried Musashi's Book of Five Rings with my.
Mm,
I got a copy that's highlighted, underlined. I carried it everywhere I went. It's not like it's on my body, but on deployment and stuff
right.
like that
Yeah.
for my entire life. Uh, I'm pretty sure it's the Tuttle translation. There's only one translation that's good.
Hmm.
It's like
Hmm.
anything else. Somebody tried to turn it into a business book after that, or most of the other translations
Yeah.
suck.
Yeah.
That was fantastic. I have. This is kind of like painful to admit, just like right wing dude. I've just started reading Evola right now. Like I'm
Hmm.
right now in the Bow in the Club, and I've got a couple
Yeah.
others lined up. So
I've
I'm not
read
going to
that
like
one.
throw
Yeah.
too much judgment on that one, but I like it so far. It's at
Yeah.
least very eye opening.
Yeah.
Uh,
He is not an easy read though. I have
no, he's really
had,
not.
he's hard. Have you read Metaphysics of War?
No, I have not. That's next.
Okay. Yeah. I think that was the first one I read of his. And I mean, it's like I'm one page, I'm like, oh yeah, man, this is awesome. And then like next paragraph, I'm like, where am I, man? Like I'm like
What the hell are
so
you talking
lost.
about?
I'm like, yeah, I'm so lost. But
Right.
but yeah, I mean, you almost need to get some cliff notes with him. But yeah, he's pretty profound. Yeah, when you get to Metaphysics of War, maybe we'll come back and talk about
Oh, that'd
that
be
once
cool.
you
Yeah,
let
for
me know
sure.
when you finish that. But he's got a really interesting take on there where he talks about the difference between a warrior versus a soldier. Like he's
Interesting.
like, not all soldiers are warriors, and I'll
Right.
leave that one. And, and he kind of explains that, but maybe we'll shelve that one because it's really fascinating. It's something I hadn't really thought about before, but according to the way he defines it, people can define a
Mhm.
word any way they want to, but
Right.
according to his definition of, he's got his he's got its number, so to say. I think
Yeah.
he's onto something there. So yeah, but again, very interesting dude, but and controversial, but
Right.
sometimes hard to understand. But yeah, I've read Bow in the Club. I've got Revolt Against the Modern World, but I'm I'm not brave enough to tackle that one yet. But I think
Totally get it.
I'm
Totally get it, man. Totally get it.
but I will. I'm not going to be bested by a guy you know, that's long gone, but I'm going to get back to it soon. But yeah, so cool. So we've got Book of Five Rings. One of my favorite quotes out of that, that I'll use a lot in classes when people are having trouble doing something, for the first time. I always go through, tell them who Musashi is, 60 duels, fought to the death, all this kind of stuff. But he's got a quote that he says, when he's talking about his system, learning his system, he said, it'll be difficult at first, but all things are difficult at first. And I'm like, yeah, man, like, don't be so hard on yourself. You know what I
Yeah,
mean? Like
man.
we all
Yeah.
started at the beginning, man. Like
Yeah.
people get so frustrated because like you show them how to do something and then they can't do it like you did it. And then they're
Right.
like, oh, this, I'm like, dude, I've been practicing this stuff. You think I'm
Right.
doing this for the first time out here demoing
Right.
this for you?
Right.
Like, I mean, like
I,
I
I,
just
pra-
got off the,
I practiced this week to show you, man. Like,
oh
come
yeah,
on,
oh
dude.
yeah, oh
Yeah.
yeah. Like I definitely, and, yeah, so it's like, yeah, everybody has a starting point. It's the beginning, you know what I mean? So like take a brain, but man, that quote's really been valuable for me. I found like, well, tell me what you think about this with his book. It's a short book. It's not
Very
that
short.
long.
Yep.
So he's got, it's kind of got the preamble and he's kind of discussing the tenets of his philosophy, and it's really captivating. And then he gets into the mechanics of his sword style, right?
Yeah.
Where he's literally talking about techniques after
Yeah.
techniques after techniques. And then that's where I find myself when I've read it before. You kind of lose people at that
Yeah.
point because you're just like, well, I ain't sword fighting and I ain't really going to take this up. So, like, do you find that even in those that there's lessons that are
Oh, yeah.
you can
Huge, man.
extrapolate to other area?
Here's how I've always read it. One paragraph. So I'll
Mm,
flip it open to part of those one paragraph. That's it. Close the book, put it away. And then I sit and think about it. I think about, okay, this is how that applied to him. This is how that applied to swords, which I don't know anything about swinging a sword. So let's not pretend that for a second that I do because I never had any interest in it. But I can at least appreciate it's a handheld weapon. You karate chop things with it,
mm-hmm,
whatever.
Yeah, yeah.
And then I think, does that apply to other things in life? Does that apply to me with a gun? Does that apply to
Mm,
me, all that shit aside, in some kind of weird metaphysical way? That's
yeah.
how I take in Musashi, and that's how I
Mm,
recommend people do it too. It's not one to
yeah.
me that you can just like pour through. But if you do it that way, some of them still won't make any sense, and that's fine. You might come back
Hmm.
to that one in 3 years though, and like, oh, here's what he meant.
Yeah.
Here's the thing.
Yeah. Yeah. Because that is something too. He said in the beginning of the book that he's like, this, your martial art. And when he talks about martial art, he's not talking about like karate, handheld stuff. He's talking about the
Killing people
warrior
with a
arts,
fucking
right?
sword.
With
Yeah,
weapons. Yeah. With what, particularly the sword. But he's like,
yeah,
it works according to principles and it should be useful in not just fighting, but in many things. Why?
yes,
And and he also says learn the way of many professions, right? Because
hmm,
I think my interpretation of that is like he's saying, look, life operates according to principles. Find that through line,
yeah,
so that it
exactly.
will. So then, because once you start seeing it one place, you see it somewhere else, and that's when you really got it, right? That's how
Right.
I take it. Do you? What
Yeah.
do you think
No,
about that?
exactly. I mean, I agree with that 100%. That's exactly it. I think Musashi skews towards the martial more than anything else. And
Hmm.
again, he's not like, it's not like he got a, black belt factory down at the strip mall. This guy was actually murking
Yeah.
fools with a sword or a boat oar or a spear.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So, I mean, he's legit. But that's one of the reasons I think I like his the best is it is perfect for anybody in the real martial space, which is guns, long
Hmm.
guns, pistols, knives,
Hmm.
whatever weaponry we use, your hands.
Hmm.
It's applicable to all of them.
Yeah. So, oh well, then that brings me up this question. Let me pose it to you.
Sure.
So Masashi lived during the Warring States period. I'm not like a huge Japanese history fan, but like you, I dabbled, for a time in my life where I was really interested in it.
Yeah.
But so you've got the Warring States, it's feudal Japan. You have all these
Yeah.
warlords that are battling it out, for power, for land, all that kind of stuff. And so these samurai serve a lord, and it's during this time, they're starting to the culture is developing, and the ideas of honor and courage and valor and who you are as a fighter and that type of thing, is tied up with your identity, and just like any other warrior culture, right? And so
Right.
then you have the battle of Sekigahara, which is where the guy, what's his name, Tokugawa Ieyasu, right? He wins and he becomes a shogun, right? So then from there, we go from the Warring States period into the Edo period, which is 250 years of peace. No more wars, right?
Mhm.
So that's where you start having a decline of the samurai class, right? Because they're not fighting anyone. So one thing that they
Mhm.
did, you've got these highly trained killers, and now they've really kind of worked themselves out of a profession, and so now what they're doing is
Yeah.
starting to duel each other. So they're doing duels
Yeah.
oftentimes to the death. But that was a way that someone could still be that, that warrior as it was defined at the time, but they could still test themselves in that
Yes.
profession, so to say. So I think for people who don't serve in the military, especially maybe even law enforcement, guys that are wanting to pursue this path, like they don't have that outlet. Like you can't go sign up and just go to a deployment. GWAT's winded down. I mean, most
Right.
dudes are back to doing their careers and maybe they won't go on any real deployment.
Right.
And then you've got guys, so they're not going to they might go their whole career and not be tested in a combat situation. Then you got
Yeah.
dudes that are like, okay, well, what do I do? I think that's one of the hard. Do you see where I'm going?
Oh,
Like
dude. Yes.
some
No, I
guy that
do.
works at a bank that's like, yeah,
Yeah.
dude, I'm all about it. I'm in. I want to follow this warrior path. I see the need, but like, what's the mechanism to make it real to where I don't feel like I'm just LARPing or overreacting to something I watch on the news? I
This
know that's a
is
long-winded way to ask a
no, no.
question, but
No. It's a good question. It's a very valid question, and it's tough to answer. But I'm going to give it a shot, and it's
okay.
fair. It's totally
Yeah.
fucking fair. It's 100% fair. Dudes of my vintage, like I enlisted in 1998 before the war.
Mm,
We didn't know. back then if we would ever get tested. Because, I mean, there hadn't been a real war
Mhm.
since Vietnam. Like, there was some,
Yeah.
Panama was like 4 days, Desert
Yeah.
Storm was like 4 days. Uh,
Yeah.
and I knew as a young guy, like higher up, like gunnery sergeants and stuff, some of which had like 6 combat action ribbons because they'd been to all 6 things since
Yeah.
1982. And there was their
Mhm.
peer who was a great dude, who was awesome, totally legit, had none because you
Mhm.
could miss everything easily from like 1979 to 2001.
Yeah.
So then the GWAT kicked off, whatever, we got our bullshit. This is a question that I come back to having seen both sides of it, and it's a valid one. You do start to see atrophy instantly when you don't have the guys that have actually been to a war before there. And the other
Mhm.
thing you see tactics and everything else stagnate hugely for
Mhm.
like 30 years. We changed more stuff about ourselves from 2001 to 2004 than we did from 2001 going back the other way to the last day we were in Vietnam, like
Yeah.
1972.
Yeah.
So it's a problem. And then on a personal level, it's 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 extraordinarily difficult and painful to kind of have to deal with if you're that guy to have never really been tested. And
Mhm.
the poor bastards that were in the Cold War, man, a lot of them, like they you could do easily an entire military career and not ever have it
Mhm.
happen.
Mhm.
Poor tank geniuses that were in Europe that for 25 years or whatever, but it never happened.
Yeah.
I feel like what you have to do, okay, it does help to find some competitive outlet for your skills. Now, this has a danger
Mhm.
too, in that competitive outlets can start becoming competitive outlets and not real skills anymore.
Mhm.
That's it's a hard one to
Yeah.
balance.
Yeah.
But you will find that, especially like the shooting stuff, a lot of the guys that were very good action guys believe
Mhm.
in the competitive side of it as well. Even like a precision rifle series just a couple of years ago, and for a couple of years, the national director was an ex Delta Force guy. All right.
Mm.
So I feel like that's one good way. The other thing, I believe that we're all going to be tested, so I don't think it's going to be a problem. Like, I think that day is coming, and that's just reality.
Yeah. Yeah.
The only other thing you can really say about it, especially if like the guy that's an insurance salesman, like, am I ever really going to need to do this? Well, man, you want to have those skills in case you do. All right. You can
Mhm.
even look at it like, hey, I invest, a couple hours a week so that, in the off chance and the tiny chance that I need this, it's there. Dude, it's the same thing as doing something that you hate to do. You have to cardio.
Yeah. Yeah.
you have to run. Cardio sucks. All right.
Yeah.
Probably
It
there's one
does.
guy there that likes to run. He's like, oh, this is amazing. Fuck you.
There's one dude and nobody
Well,
he
for him,
has no friends.
right. And
Yeah.
for him, it's honestly though, that guy is just doing push-ups for him. Like, you got to do some of that too.
Yeah.
Like, you have to have a little
Yeah.
bit of upper body mass. So you can look at it like that, and that's enough.
Mm.
It really is. If you focus and knuckle down and train for like an hour a week in 15-minute spurts, and you're serious about it, though, that's good enough. That's cool.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
if you want to get more into it and live the entire life, well, you kind of have to believe that you're going to need it. One,
Mhm.
and then the second thing, yeah, I stick to, you just find something. You don't have to be the best competitor at it either. That's not important. Find something that's going to help you drive yourself to continue doing it.
Hmm. What about what okay, so we've got that as far as the mindset. And this is kind of well, this is very related to that because I find this too with folks that are like they're training, but I think this is human nature. It's that nagging question of if you haven't been there before, the question of,
Right.
hey man, if I ever have to do this, am I going to be able to do this?
Do I have what it takes?
Yeah, do I have what it
Yeah.
takes? So for someone who doesn't have an avenue to test themselves, like going on deployment or whatever, they're too old to enlist or
Mhm.
whatever. Like how does or can how does that question get answered or can it get answered?
This is an interesting question because I've been asking myself how to help people with this for like probably the last 6 months. Like no bullshit.
Mm-hmm.
Because it is a nagging question
Mm-hmm.
when you have it. I totally get it. And it's a real question too, because people don't like to talk about this, but there were some dudes that showed up actually at some very high levels of like special operations ninja with all kinds of badges and cool shit that fucking fell apart the first time the bullets started flying, and they quit and they went home. And nobody is ever going to bring this shit up again. But it's what happened. There was just a SEAL a couple days ago on the Sean Ryan show talking about it was time to cross the Burma into Iraq. One of his platoon was like, "I'm done. Here's your trident back." So this shit happens.
Yeah.
I think that the way that you answer that question, and this could probably be a whole show by itself, but I'm gonna try to abbreviate it, and I'm also
we'll do a preview, and then we'll do another show about it. So yeah,
we have asked it though, so let me answer it to the best that I can.
Yeah.
So I think the way that you answer that question, the honest truth is, you decide you're a killer a long time before you need to be a killer. I've had that conversation a couple of times with different people that have walked this road, and that's really it. Like you don't ask yourself if you can do it. You decide that you can do it. Like right now, like today, like if I'm going to carry a fucking gun, like I can do this. More importantly, it's you throw away this Western "thou shalt not kill," which is actually means "thou shalt not murder," which is a whole different thing than kill. Right. You take all that shit and you wad it up in a ball and you throw it away. You get rid of that shit, because that is not the way of nature. It never has been. The way of nature has always been kill or be killed. And you accept that that's who we are, and there's not any guilt about it or any bad feelings or any bullshit if you kill somebody that needed it. You have that discussion with yourself. And then the other thing that I feel like is critically important, you have to look at, this isn't like, the guy that's robbing your house to get bread for his kids, which doesn't really happen. When you look at like the evil shit out there, though, like the kid fuckers and the shitbags that would gladly genocide all of us so that, I don't know, there'd be less fucking people in their way. You have to want to kill those people. And this is, God, my lawyer's going to shit his pants when he sees this podcast, but whatever. You have to. You have to have a strong animal desire, bloodlust, to kill those fucking people. You have to want it, and that will help you when the day comes that you need to.
Yeah. Man, it's something for people to think about, man. But I think that's if I'm hearing you correct, I mean, there's a certain amount of soul searching. Like if you want to find that answer, like nobody's going to be able to answer it for you. Right. So you have to be answering it yourself. And if they say, well, how do I do that? Well, it's soul searching. You have to sit down and have a conversation with yourself and walk yourself through the steps and decide whether or not you're good with that. Right? Is that what you're saying?
Yes. And then once you decide that, never ask yourself again. From that point forward, it's not it's I am.
Yeah.
And how you have that internal monologue with yourself, it's a huge bit of your mindset. It's a huge part of your personality, actually. So that you just know that you are after that. And, like I said,
I would imagine then that would also aid you in the aftermath, right? Psychologically dealing with that. Like maybe that's, and I'm not talking about TBI and stuff like that that happens. That's a separate thing. But for those who have it, maybe one of the reasons why people struggle is because maybe they didn't have that conversation with themselves beforehand.
Distinct possibility. Because especially like U.S. military is really bad at having that conversation. Yeah. And they don't like to encourage it at all. In fact, really, man, sitting here thinking about it, when I think back, my God, there were not a lot of places. It's also too, because I grew up in a pre-war military where most of those guys didn't fucking know either. So maybe they weren't going to talk about it. Yeah. But there's really no like institutional place where they really talk about that. Mostly they talk about like following orders and do your duty and all this other bullshit. Yeah. But then again, the U.S. military is also just like, I don't even know what Evola's take on this, but I can follow.
Oh yeah,
they're not interested in making warriors; they're interested in making soldiers.
You are well on your way. You're well on your way to his conclusion and what it is they are actually working for. But and the difference, man, we're about out of time. Man, Clay, I really appreciate you coming on. This was a great conversation, dude.
This was a fantastic conversation.
Went by so fast.
All right,
So
we're doing
fast.
this
Well,
again for sure.
yeah,
100.
man.
Whenever you got time.
Yeah, dude, absolutely. I hope you'll come back on again. There's a lot of stuff we could do a deeper dive on. But before we go, is there any projects that you're working on or anything you want us to plug? I'll put that I can put in the show notes.
Let me think. Yeah, I've got my books out right now. I'm actually working on a big project here coming up in the next couple of months about teaching people how to get into long range shooting.
Mm.
And a lot of the audience doesn't know this, but I'm going to meet up with the host in real life here very shortly and show him where I'm going to put this. And we're going to talk. Wait a minute, that sounded extremely dirty. We're going to put the range. And it's going to be great, man. I
Yeah.
have some ideas brewing that are going to be pretty baller, I think.
Dude, that's awesome. I can't wait, man. Well, all right. So I'm going to sign off, but hang on the line just so that we can make sure the video buffers and everything
Okay,
correctly. And we'll
easy
sign
enough.
off offline. But yeah, so hey, guys, thanks again. I hope you enjoyed Clay. Oh, yeah. But are there any links or anything you want me to put in the show notes that people can
Man,
follow you?
you can find me on Amazon or you can find me on Twitter at it's at way off the res.
Way off the res. All right, we'll make sure we
Yep.
put that in there. So Clay Martin, guys, make sure you get his books. I've read 3 of them already. I'm going to read the rest of them. They're great. He's a very compelling writer. They are page turners. I'm telling you, will once you start, you make sure you schedule some time because you're not going to want to put it down until you're done with it. He's really really talented. So, hey, that's all we got. I'm Mark signing off and telling you guys to stay sharp and keep it pearl snap.